What would you do if the world judged you by your worn-out shoes? At Sterling Elite Motors, a gleaming shrine of luxury in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina, an elderly man stepped into a storm of sneers, and no one saw the thunder coming. Samuel Harper, 81, sat silently, his weathered hands gripping a faded cap, while the sales team whispered cruel jabs. "Lost, old-timer? This isn't a thrift store." One sneered, sparking muffled laughter. Samuel's calm silence only deepened their scorn, but a seismic shift was moments away. A man in a tailored suit burst through the doors, and the air turned electric. "Welcome to Daily Narrated Stories, where hidden heroes shine." The morning light barely kissed the Raleigh skyline when Samuel Harper stepped off a creaking city bus, a small canvas bag in one hand, a worn cap in the other. His boots, polished but scarred, met the pavement with the steady rhythm of a man who'd marched through jungles and storms. At 81, Samuel carried the weight of years. His back slightly bowed from decades of toil, yet his posture held an unshakable pride. A faded navy jacket, adorned with a small American flag patch, hugged his frame. The stitching was frayed, the zipper jammed, but it was spotless, a testament to his care. His hands, rough from years of manual labor, trembled slightly as he adjusted the bag strap, but his grip remained firm, a quiet defiance against the years that had tried to wear him down. He paused for a moment, squinting against the morning glare, his pale blue eyes scanning the unfamiliar street with the precision of a soldier who'd once memorized enemy terrain. Sterling Elite Motors loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the dawn like a mirror of wealth. The sign above the entrance gleamed in polished silver, promising German precision, Italian leather, and dreams too expensive for most. The building itself seemed to hum with exclusivity, its sharp angles and spotless windows a stark contrast to the cracked sidewalks Samuel had walked to get here. He stood for a moment, taking it in, the weight of his journey settling in his chest. He'd left his trailer park in Durham at 4 a.m., the air still heavy with the scent of dew and pine, to catch the first bus. 2 transfers and 4 hours later, he was here, his legs aching but his resolve unshaken. Samuel knew he didn't fit in a place like this. His modest pension barely covered his rent, and the most expensive thing he owned was the watch his late wife had given him on their 20th anniversary. A simple piece that hadn't ticked in years but still sat in his pocket, a talisman of better days. But he wasn't here for a car. He was here for family. Inside, his grandson, Ethan Sterling, ran the dealership. Samuel hadn't seen him in 5 years, not since the memorial service for Ethan's mother, Samuel's daughter, where Ethan, voice trembling, had said, "He gave me a home when I had none," before disappearing into the city's chaos. That day, Ethan had been a shadow of the boy Samuel raised, his eyes hollow, his hands shaking as he gripped the podium. Samuel had wanted to reach out, to pull him close, but Ethan had slipped away before the service ended, leaving Samuel with a lingering ache that hadn't faded. For months, Samuel had replayed that moment, wondering where he'd failed, what he could have done to bridge the gap. He'd written letters, dozens of them, only to crumple them up, the words too heavy, too raw. But last month, a small article in the local paper had caught his eye. Sterling Elite Motors expands in Raleigh. Ethan's name in bold print had reignited something in Samuel. A need to see, to know, to reconnect. He'd planned this reunion ever since, enduring the long bus ride, his heart thrumming with a mix of hope and fear. The glass doors parted with a soft hiss, and Samuel stepped into a world of polished excess. Cool air brushed his face, laced with the scent of leather and espresso, a far cry from the musty bus he'd ridden in. Soft jazz hummed from hidden speakers, the notes floating like a delicate thread through the air, while the faint clink of porcelain cups hinted at wealth Samuel could only imagine. A marble reception desk gleamed under recessed lights, its surface so pristine it reflected the ceiling like a mirror. A young woman, her hair pulled into a severe bun, sat behind it, her smile as cold as the marble. Her name tag read Lila. She didn't look up as Samuel approached, her fingers tapping rapidly on a keyboard. the sound sharp and impatient. Samuel cleared his throat, the noise barely a whisper in the vast space. "Excuse me, miss," he said softly, his voice gravelly but kind. Her eyes flicked over him. Jacket, boots, age. And her smile tightened, a practiced mask that didn't reach her eyes. "Deliveries go around back, sir," she said, her voice clipped, carrying the weight of 1,000 assumptions. "I'm not here for that," Samuel replied, his tone gentle but firm, the way he'd once spoken to new recruits who needed steadying. "I'm here to see my grandson, Ethan Sterling. He owns this place." Her brow arched, disbelief flickering in her eyes like a spark about to die. She leaned back slightly, her gaze lingering on his frayed jacket, the scuffed boots, the lines etched deep into his face. "This area is for clients," she said, her voice now tinged with a faint edge of irritation. She gestured to a sleek waiting area near a floor-to-ceiling window, the chairs all sharp angles and black leather. "You can wait there. Someone might help you eventually." The word eventually hung in the air, heavy with dismissal. Samuel nodded, unfazed, his years of facing rejection, both on the battlefield and in civilian life, having forged a quiet resilience. He shuffled to a low leather chair, its surface cold and unyielding, and eased himself down with a faint grimace. The chair was too modern, too stiff, digging into his knees as he sat, a cruel reminder of his age. He folded his cap across his lap, the fabric worn thin from years of use, and waited. 5 minutes stretched to 10, then 20. No one came. Near the espresso machine, a cluster of salesmen in crisp shirts swapped smirks, their voices low but cutting. One, with slicked back hair and a flashy watch that caught the light like a beacon, glanced at Samuel and muttered, "Bet he's here for a free coffee and a nap." Laughter rippled through the group, sharp and mean, the sound bouncing off the polished walls. Another salesman, younger but just as smug, added, "Probably lost on his way to the bingo hall." The group snickered again, their voices carrying the kind of casual cruelty that comes from never having to look hardship in the eye. Samuel heard every word, his hearing sharper than they'd assumed, honed by years of listening for danger in the dark. But his face didn't change, his expression a mask of calm that hid the storm of memories their words stirred. Nights in muddy trenches, the sting of shrapnel, the weight of loss as he'd buried comrades under a sky that offered no mercy. He wasn't here for their respect. He was here for Ethan. From his pocket, he pulled a creased photo, its edges soft from years of handling. The image showed him and a young Ethan, maybe 9, building a kite on a sunlit porch. Ethan's grin was wide, his hands sticky with glue, his eyes bright with the kind of joy that only comes from feeling safe, loved. Samuel's chest tightened with the memory, a bittersweet ache that brought both warmth and sorrow. That day, they'd spent hours on that kite, Samuel teaching Ethan how to tie the string just right, how to angle it against the wind. When it finally soared, Ethan had hooped, his laughter echoing through the yard, and Samuel had felt a pride so deep it hurt. He'd kept that photo close ever since, a reminder of the boy he'd raised, the boy he'd lost to time and grief. He traced a finger over Ethan's face, the faded ink blurring under his touch, and looked up again. No one came. An hour crawled by, each minute heavier than the last. Customers in tailored suits breezed in, their voices loud with entitlement, their hands clutching phones that cost more than Samuel's monthly rent. They were greeted with sparkling water and warm smiles, the staff bending over backward to please. Samuel remained a ghost, invisible in his corner, the photo still in his hand. Lila glanced at him once, her frown deepening, her lips pursing as if his presence offended her. She turned away, her attention snapping back to a client who'd just walked in, her smile blooming like a flower in sunlight. Samuel's throat tightened, not with anger, but with a quiet sorrow. He'd seen this before, the way the world looked past those it deemed unworthy, the way it erased them without a second thought. He'd felt in the years after the war, when he'd returned to a country that thanked him with words, but not with work, when he'd stood in lines for jobs, only to be told he was too old, too slow, too broken. A young salesman, Nate, barely 22, hesitated as he passed, his polished shoes squeaking faintly on the marble floor. His name tag glinted under the lights, and his eyes, still soft with the uncertainty of youth, met Samuel's for a moment. "Sir," he said cautiously, his voice low as if afraid of being overheard. "Do you need help?" Samuel looked up, his eyes warm despite the coldness around him. "Just waiting for my grandson, Ethan Sterling. He runs this place." Nate blinked, startled, his mouth opening slightly as if to speak, then closing again. "Mr. Sterling?" he said finally, his voice tinged with disbelief. I'll check." He hurried off, casting a nervous glance back, his steps quickening as he disappeared behind a glass partition. Samuel watched him go, a flicker of hope stirring in his chest, but he tamped it down. He learned long ago not to expect too much. The showroom doors chimed softly, and the atmosphere shifted, the air growing thick with anticipation. Ethan Sterling strode in, tall, sharp in a charcoal suit, a leather briefcase in one hand. His presence commanded the room. Employees straightened, conversations hushed, the jazz seeming to fade into the background. His jaw was set, his eyes scanning the space with the intensity of a man who'd built an empire from nothing. Nate met him halfway, whispering quickly, gesturing towards Samuel with a subtle tilt of his head. Ethan's gaze locked on the old man by the window, and time froze. His briefcase hit the floor with a thud that echoed like a gunshot, and he ran. Not walked, ran. "Grandpa!" The word tore from him, raw and unguarded, a cry that carried years of longing and regret. The salesman froze mid-sentence, their smirks vanishing as if wiped away by an unseen hand. Lila's jaw dropped, her pen clattering to the desk. Samuel stood, his movements slow but deliberate, a small smile breaking through the lines of his face. "Hey kid," he said, his voice a low rumble as Ethan enveloped him in a fierce hug, his arms trembling as they wrapped around the old man. "You're really here," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion, his breath warm against Samuel's shoulder. "You came all this way." Samuel chuckled, the sound soft but steady, a lifeline in the storm of Ethan's emotions. "Took me a while, but I had to see you." Ethan pulled back, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, his hands still gripping Samuel's shoulders as if afraid he'd vanish. "Why didn't you call?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Wanted it to be a surprise," Samuel said simply, his eyes crinkling with a warmth that hadn't faded in decades. Ethan turned, his gaze sweeping the stunned staff, his expression darkening as the reality of the situation sank in. "Did anyone help him?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Nate stammered, "I just did, sir." Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "And before that?" Lila flushed, her cheeks burning as she mumbled, "He said he was here for you, but no appointment." Ethan's eyes darkened further as he took in Samuel's worn boots, the careful folds of his cap, the photo still clutched in his hand. "Everyone," he said, his voice low but firm, each word deliberate. "This is Samuel Harper, U.S. Army, retired. Purple Heart, Bronze Star. He raised me when I had nothing." The room shifted, the air growing heavy with shame, the weight of their actions pressing down on every person there. Samuel patted Ethan's arm, his touch light but grounding. "No need to fuss," he said quietly, his voice a soothing balm against Ethan's rising anger. "I'm not here for trouble." Ethan shook his head, his expression fierce. The trouble was already here. He turned to the staff, his voice steady but cold. "Clear the floor. Shut down sales. I'll handle calls. To Lila, we'll talk later. To Nate, get my grandfather a coffee, black, 1 sugar. Bring it to my office." Nate nodded and darted off, his steps quick and eager to please. Ethan retrieved his briefcase and guided Samuel upstairs, his hand resting lightly on the old man's back. "You sure you're not too busy?" Samuel asked, his tone light, a faint teasing note in his voice. Ethan's smile was warm, genuine for the first time that day. Nothing's more important than this. In Ethan's office, the chaos of the showroom faded, replaced by a quiet that felt almost sacred. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden streaks across a walnut desk, its surface cluttered with papers, a sleek laptop, and a small photo frame turned face down. Samuel sat in a chair that felt more like art than furniture, its leather cool against his hands, the cushion too firm for his aching joints. He shifted slightly, trying to find a comfortable position, the chair creaking faintly under his weight. Ethan paced, his polished shoes clicking softly on the hardwood floor, each step a metronome of his restless energy. 5 years had stretched between them. Missed calls, unspoken grief since Ethan's mother passed, a wound neither had known how to heal. The silence between them now was heavy with all the things they hadn't said, all the moments they'd lost. Ethan stopped pacing, his hands clenching briefly before he forced them to relax. "Coffee's coming," he said, breaking the silence, his voice softer now, tinged with a vulnerability he hadn't shown downstairs. "You hungry?" Samuel shrugged, his shoulders lifting slightly, the motion slow and deliberate. "Just glad to be here," he said, his eyes meeting Ethan's, a quiet reassurance in his gaze. Ethan stopped, his jaw tight, his throat working as he swallowed hard. He looked at the man who'd taught him to fish in icy streams, who'd patched his sneakers with tape, who'd cheered his graduation with quiet pride that spoke louder than any shout. Memories flooded back. Nights when Samuel had stayed up late, teaching him multiplication tables by the light of a flickering lamp. Mornings when he'd woken Ethan with the smell of pancakes, the only thing Samuel knew how to cook well. The day Samuel had given him his old army knife, saying, "It's for protection, but use it for building instead." Ethan's chest tightened, the weight of those memories pressing against the walls he'd built around himself. "I didn't expect you," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, raw with emotion. Samuel nodded, his expression softening, the lines around his eyes deepening with understanding. "I know. Should have called." Ethan sank into a chair across from him, the leather creaking as he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Life got loud," he said, his voice quieter now, the words heavy with regret. "After Mom, I didn't know what to say." Samuel's gaze softened further, but he saw the tension in Ethan's shoulders, the way his eyes flicked to the door, still managing the world beyond even in this moment of vulnerability. He saw the boy he'd raised in the man before him. The same boy who'd once climbed into his lap during thunderstorms, seeking safety, now buried under layers of responsibility and grief. "Didn't need a call," Samuel said, his voice steady, a quiet anchor in the storm of Ethan's emotions. "Just needed to see you're okay." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and hollow. "You saw them down there." "That's okay now, suit, sales, fake smiles." Samuel said nothing, letting the silence speak, his presence a quiet reminder of the values he'd instilled in Ethan. Honesty, integrity, the kind of strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. Nate arrived with a tray, 2 mugs, steam curling upward, and a plate of blueberry scones, their edges golden and crisp. "Black, 1 sugar," he said, setting it down with a careful precision that spoke of his nervousness. "They sent scones, your favorite, I heard." Samuel nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm, the kind of warmth that made Nate's shoulders relax slightly. Nate glanced at Ethan, his expression uncertain. "Anything else, Mr. Sterling?" Ethan gave a curt nod, his mind still half in the showroom, half in the past. "That's all." Nate left, the door clicking softly behind him, leaving them alone again. They sipped the coffee, its bitterness sharp but grounding, the warmth spreading through Samuel's hands as he held the mug. Ethan leaned back, his eyes drifting to the window, the city stretching out below like a map of his ambitions. "Want a tour?" he asked suddenly, a spark of warmth in his voice, a glimmer of the boy Samuel remembered. Samuel smiled, the motion slow but genuine. "You built this. I'd like to see your world." They walked the showroom, Ethan at Samuel's side, their steps a quiet rhythm against the polished floor. This time, no one ignored them. Employees stood straighter. Phones vanished. Whispers died. The air thick with a newfound respect, or perhaps fear of Ethan's wrath. Samuel moved slowly, his pace deliberate, pausing to admire the cars, not for their price, but their craft. He ran a hand along the curve of a sleek silver Audi, his fingers tracing the smooth metal with the reverence of a man who'd once rebuilt engines with nothing but a wrench and a prayer. "Which one sells best?" he asked, his voice curious, his eyes bright with interest. "Depends," Ethan said, his tone softening as he fell into step beside Samuel. "That's for execs, but SUVs move faster. People want comfort." Samuel nodded, his lips quirking in a faint smile. "Makes sense," he said, but his mind drifted to the old pickup he'd driven for years, its seats worn but familiar, its engine a symphony of rattles he'd known by heart. They passed rows of cars, each gleaming under skylights, their paint shining like glass, the air heavy with the scent of newness. Samuel's eyes lingered on a deep blue convertible, its lines sharp and elegant, the kind of car he'd once dreamed of as a young man, before the war, before reality had reshaped his dreams into something smaller, more practical. "Beautiful work," he murmured, more to himself than to Ethan, his voice tinged with a wistful note that caught Ethan off guard. Ethan glanced at him, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "You ever think about getting something like this?" he asked, half joking, half serious. Samuel chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Nah, my old truck got me where I needed to go. Didn't need more than that." Ethan nodded, a pang of guilt twisting in his chest. He'd built a world of excess, but Samuel had always found meaning in the simple things. "Remember the old Chevy?" Samuel asked suddenly, his voice pulling Ethan back to the present. Ethan paused, his steps faltering as the memory surfaced. "The 92? You let me pretend it was a submarine," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Samuel's eyes crinkled, the memory lighting up his face. "Had a dent in the hood. You said it gave it soul." Ethan's smile widened, the tension in his shoulders easing as the memory unfolded. "I said it had spirit," he corrected, the words a bridge to a time when the world had been smaller, simpler, when happiness was a dented truck in a grandfather's laughter. They continued through the lounge, the conference room, the delivery bay, each space more polished than the last, each a testament to Ethan's success. The lounge was a study in luxury. Plush chairs, a glass coffee table, a wall of windows overlooking the city. Samuel paused by the window, his gaze drifting to the skyline, the buildings stretching toward the sky like fingers reaching for something they'd never grasped. "You've come a long way," he said softly, his voice tinged with pride, but also a faint sadness, as if he wondered what it had cost. In the service bay, Samuel's face lit up, the sterile polish of the showroom giving way to the grit and grease of real work. The air smelled of oil and metal, a familiar scent that brought a rush of memories. Hours spent in a cramped garage, teaching Ethan the difference between a socket wrench and a torque wrench, the boy's small hands eager but clumsy. A young mechanic looked up, wiping his hands on a rag, his coveralls streaked with grime. "Mr. Sterling, this your grandfather?" he asked, his tone respectful but curious. Ethan nodded, a spark of pride in his eyes. "Samuel Harper. Taught me to fix a radiator when I was 7. Samuel corrected, 6. Your hand were small. Made it easier." The mechanic grinned, a genuine smile that warmed the space, and Ethan shook his head, warmth in his eyes as he watched Samuel interact with the young man, the ease of it a reminder of the grandfather he'd always known, steady, patient kind. Back in the office, Ethan sat quietly while Samuel gazed out the window, the city a blur of lights and motion below. "I wanted to build something that mattered," Ethan said finally, his voice low, the words heavy with a truth he'd buried under years of ambition. "A name people respected." Samuel turned, his eyes soft but piercing, seeing through the layers Ethan had built around himself. "You did," he said simply, but the words carried a weight that made Ethan's chest tighten. Ethan's voice dropped, a confession slipping out. But I lost why. He opened a drawer, pulling out a small wooden box, its surface smooth from years of handling. "I meant to send this last year," he said, sliding it across the desk. Inside was a photo, Samuel and Ethan on that porch, the kite between them. Now framed, the glass smudged from Ethan's fingerprints. Beside it, a brass pocket watch, inscribed, "To the man who gave me everything and asked for nothing." Samuel's hand trembled as he closed the lid, the inscription burning into his memory, a testament to a bond that time couldn't erase. "I thought if I made it big, you'd be proud," Ethan said, his voice raw, the vulnerability in it a stark contrast to the polished he'd become. "You already did," Samuel replied, his voice steady, a quiet certainty in his words that anchored Ethan in the storm of his own doubts. Ethan turned to the window, guilt heavy in his voice, the city lights reflecting in his eyes like a mirror of his regrets. "I'll let them treat you like nothing today. I forgot what you taught me about honor." Samuel's voice was soft, a gentle rebuke wrapped in love. "You remembered when it mattered." That evening, Ethan gathered his team in the lobby, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Samuel sat to the side, sipping coffee, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of emotions swirling around him. The staff stood in a loose semicircle, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease, the weight of the day's events hanging over them. Ethan stepped forward, his posture straight, his voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. "I'll tell you about a man who raised me in a tiny trailer on a veteran's pension, who fixed cars with tools older than me, who worked double shifts so I'd have books for school," he began, his eyes locking on Samuel as he spoke, each word a tribute, a reckoning. "A man who taught me strength without ever shouting. Today, you ignored him, judged him. This isn't to shame you, it's to change us. This business carries my name, but it's built on his shoulders." He turned to Nate, his gaze softening. "You noticed something was off. That matters. To Lila, you're now training coordinator for veteran outreach. I want a module by Friday." The staff nodded, some hesitant, others resolute, the gravity of Ethan's words sinking in. Samuel watched, calm and present, his coffee mug warm in his hands, a quiet pride in his eyes as he saw the man Ethan was becoming. Later, on the second-floor balcony, Samuel and Ethan sat under a sky, fading to indigo, the city lights twinkling below like a sea of stars. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain, a promise of renewal. "You firing her?" Samuel asked, nodding toward the empty lobby, his tone casual but curious. "Lila, no," Ethan said, his voice firm but thoughtful. "She learned today." Samuel grunted, a low sound of approval. "Shame teaches well." Ethan laughed softly, the sound a release of tension, a glimpse of the boy Samuel remembered. "Ever thought of running HR?" Samuel shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Had enough of that in the Army." Silence settled, comfortable and familiar, the kind of silence that only comes from years of shared history. "Stay a while," Ethan said, his voice soft but earnest. "I've got a guest house. We got time to make up." Samuel pulled out the kite photo, laying it on the table between them, the edges curling slightly from years of handling. "You always search for meaning, even as a boy," he said, his voice a quiet melody of memory and hope. "You'll find it again." Ethan nodded, moved, his throat tight with emotion as the city hummed below, a quiet healing taking root between them. The next week, Samuel stayed in Ethan's guest house, a simple space with cedar walls, a narrow bed, and a coffee maker that groaned with age. Each morning, he brewed coffee at dawn, the bitter aroma filling the air, a ritual that grounded him in the midst of change. Each night, he sat on the porch, the city lights flickering like a distant galaxy, his thoughts drifting to the past, to the boy Ethan had been, to the man he was becoming. Ethan threw himself into change with a fervor that Samuel recognized. The same determination Ethan had shown as a child, building that kite, refusing to give up even when the strings snapped. He rewrote policies, launched veteran training programs, and added to the mission statement, "Honor isn't bought, it's owed. On Thursday, he called the board, his voice steady as he spoke. End of quarter meeting, Friday, 9 a.m., in person, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The air in the dealership grew taut, whispers of change stirring unease, a quiet storm brewing on the horizon. Some adapted quickly. Nate volunteered for the veteran initiative, eager to lead, his earnestness a bright spot in the uncertainty. Others resisted, their discomfort palpable. Marcus Tate, a senior sales manager, bristled at the shifts, his pride wounded by the incident with Samuel. He'd built his career on commissions, not causes, and the idea of change felt like a threat to everything he'd worked for. Thursday night, he stayed late, the dealership quiet except for the hum of his computer, his fingers clicking through old contracts with a feverish intensity. He made a call, his voice low, the words careful but pointed. "We need to talk," he said, the line crackling with tension, a hint of what was to come. Friday arrived, sharp and tense, the air heavy with anticipation. Board members rolled in, greeted with coffee and smiles, their tailored suits a stark contrast to Samuel's simple button-up. Samuel stood by Ethan, his army pin glinting on his shirt, a quiet symbol of his past. Ethan introduced him, his voice proud, but the board's minds were on profits, not stories, their eyes already glazing over with the promise of numbers. In the conference room, Ethan began, his presence commanding, his voice steady. Revenues up 15%. "We secured 3 new contracts," he said, clicking a remote to display charts that glowed on the screen, their lines a testament to his success. Applause followed, a polite ripple of approval. "But that's not why we're here," he continued, his tone shifting, the air growing still. "We've forgotten who we are." He clicked again, and a photo appeared. Samuel, alone in the showroom, cap in hand, his solitude a stark accusation. "This man walked in 2 weeks ago. He was ignored, mocked. He's my grandfather. But even if he weren't, he deserved better." Silence stretched, heavy with the weight of truth. "This company carries my name, but it's built on his shoulders," Ethan said, his voice rising slightly, a fire in his words. Another click, Samuel in uniform, holding a young Ethan, fixing an engine, the images a bridge between past and present. "We'll launch a veteran outreach program, dedicate 10% of bonuses to veteran causes, and hire veterans across all roles," he announced, his vision clear, his resolve unshakable. A board member, gray-haired and skeptical, leaned back, his expression hard. "Is this about profit or guilt?" he asked, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence. Ethan's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Purpose," he said simply, the word a declaration, a challenge. Marcus stood, sliding a folder forward, his movements deliberate, his eyes glinting with calculation. "These changes, hiring, budgets, weren't fully approved. They impact dividends," he said, his voice smooth but laced with venom. The room buzzed, a low hum of unease. "We're a business, not a charity," Marcus added, his words a gauntlet thrown down, a line drawn in the sand. Samuel's eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger stirring in his chest, a rare heat that he'd long since learned to control. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate, the room falling silent as he rose. "I've seen men die for strangers in places so dark you'd pray for blindness," he said, his voice like steel, each word a hammer striking stone. "Don't speak of sacrifice unless you've paid it." Marcus stiffened, his confidence faltering under the weight of Samuel's gaze. Samuel looked to the board, his presence a quiet storm, his words a clarion call. "Every generation chooses its legacy. Some pick wealth, some pick honor." He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, the gesture both protective and proud. "I came to see what man my grandson became. Now I see what he's building." The room fell silent, heavy with reflection, the weight of Samuel's words settling over them like a shroud. Ethan straightened, his jaw set, his voice steady. "I'll call a vote. If this isn't the vision, I'll walk." One by one, the board voted yes, except Marcus, who muttered his assent last, his defiance crumbling under the tide of change. That night, Samuel packed his bag, wiping down the guest house counter with the care of a man who'd always taken pride in leaving things better than he found them. Ethan knocked, his silhouette framed in the doorway, the moonlight casting shadows across his face. "You're leaving?" he asked, his voice tinged with a quiet panic. Samuel nodded, his movements slow but sure. "Saw what I needed," he said, his voice a quiet reassurance. Ethan stepped inside, his hands in his pockets, his posture uncertain. "I'm naming the program after you. The Harper Initiative," he said, his voice firm, a promise in the words. Samuel chuckled, the sound soft but genuine. "Folks'll think it's for someone important." "It is," Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly, the emotion raw and unguarded. He pressed the pocket watch into Samuel's hand, the metal cool against his skin. "This belongs to you." Samuel opened it, the inscription glowing in the dim light. "To the man who gave me everything." He smiled, the motion slow but deep, a quiet acceptance of the love behind the words. "Take care of this place," he said, his voice a gentle command, a final blessing. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I will." As Samuel left, the staff gathered. Nate with a coffee, Lila with a respectful nod, even Marcus, silent but present, his presence a quiet acknowledgement of the change Samuel had sparked. Ethan sat alone that night, the pocket watch on his desk, its ticking a quiet heartbeat in the stillness. The silence pressed in, forcing the question, what will I be remembered for? The dealership wasn't about cars, it was about legacy. Over the next month, Sterling Elite Motors transformed. A corner alcove became the Harper Honor Wall. A flag, Samuel's photo, a plaque. He walked in silently and taught us who we serve. A leather-bound book sat beneath, where visitors wrote names, memories, words like seen, honored, home. Ethan read each entry, keeping a copy close, a reminder of the man who'd shaped him. The Harper Initiative launched, veteran hiring, scholarships, housing support. Every veteran employee got a plaque with their service branch, a small but meaningful tribute. Veteran clients got priority access, their needs met with a care that spoke of respect, not profit. First Fridays became quiet hour for vets with PTSD, dim lights, soft music, no pressure, a space designed for healing. Nate, now veteran liaison, asked every customer, "Did someone in your life serve?" If yes, they engraved a plate in the car's glove box, a small tribute, a hidden memorial. Over 150 cars left with these silent tributes, each a testament to a legacy of service. Marcus resigned months later, his departure quiet but inevitable. "This isn't my world," he said, his voice devoid of the venom it had once held. Ethan shook his hand, his grip firm but fair. "Your grandfather," Marcus added, his voice low, "made me see what I didn't want to. Some goodbyes carry lessons, a quiet closure to a chapter that needed to end." Samuel returned to Durham, to early coffee and VFW shifts, his life a quiet rhythm of routine and reflection. Weekly, he sent Ethan a card. No return address, just a line. "Don't let polish dim your heart." Ethan taped each to his wall, a growing collection of wisdom that kept him grounded. A customer asked about them, her curiosity genuine. "They keep me grounded," Ethan said, his voice soft, a quiet tribute to the man who'd shaped him. The story spread. A veterans forum post, a local article, a national piece. A producer offered a TV segment, but Ethan declined. "Heroes need presence, not press," he said, his voice firm, a reflection of the values Samuel had instilled in him. 5 months later, a man walked in, holding a faded photo of 3 soldiers. One was Samuel. "He saved me in '72, the man said, his voice trembling with emotion. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You're welcome here," he said, his voice a quiet echo of Samuel's kindness. 2 years later, Samuel passed quietly, his departure as unassuming as his life had been. The funeral was small, per his wishes, a simple gathering of family under a sky heavy with clouds. Ethan whispered at the grave, his words lost to the wind, then framed Samuel's cards in a private gallery for staff, a quiet tribute to the man who'd reminded them what mattered. He launched the Samuel Harper Legacy Fund. Job training, mentorship, emotional support for veterans, a lasting legacy of the man who'd walked in silently and changed everything. Its tagline: some men build empires, others build men. Ethan stood before the Harper Wall, the lights low, the city buzzing outside. He touched the glass, whispering, "I hope I made you proud." The air felt sacred, as if every overlooked soul whispered back, "You did, kid." Samuel's journey, from a mocked veteran to a symbol of honor, reminds us that courage and kindness can shift the world, even in silence. It's a call to see the unseen, to honor the quiet heroes among us, to choose integrity over image. Reflect on your own life. Who's been your quiet hero? Share their story in the comments below to keep their legacy alive. Don't let these stories fade. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories now. We're racing to 1,000 subscribers, and your support ensures tales of hope and resilience reach the world. Act now. Be part of our mission to inspire, uplift, and honor the unspoken. Daily Narrated Stories brings you life-changing narratives. Join us today